Hi, it's me, Tommy Maloney, host of this podcast, Blending the Family. Before we get started, this episode is sponsored by Blending the Family. Whether it's general life coaching you need or even a speaker for your next event, please head over to the website blendingthefamily.com for the details. Again, blendingthefamily.com, or email me directly, info@blendingthefamily.com. Let's start this episode.
I grew up in Boston in the 80s and the 90s, and crack epidemic was kind of blossoming. Gangs were pretty rampant. My house had been broken into several times. I've been robbed, jumped, shot at before before I was a teenager. So I didn't physically feel safe. Emotionally, I didn't have high self-esteem or confidence.
Welcome to another edition of the podcast known as Blending the Family. I am your host, Tommy Maloney. This week, our guest is Eugene Schneeberg. I hope I'm pronouncing Eugene's last name right. His new book, I Never Met My Father. Let's try that again. I Never Met My Father. His book is a very powerful true story of brokenness, forgiveness, healing, restoration, and hope. Not to say this is about me, but as you can feel, I'm not 100%, and it's been a weird month. At the time of this recording, I had my tooth pulled. The week before that, I was in urgent care, so it's been a rough month. But again, we have Eugene Schneeberg, author of his new book, I Never Met My Father. So very, very excited to share his story, his journey with you on this episode. As I said, I had a tooth pulled, and it was one of those situations where that's how I ended up in urgent care. And the following week, made a dentist appointment, and the dentist said, well, we need to take that tooth out. I'm like, okay. Now? He goes, I've got time. So here we are. Gosh, yeah. So I really don't have a lot to say because I have zero energy. I did try to eat last night, and for those of you who've gone through, oral type surgery, you have the pain, but at the same time, man, you just want to eat something. So as a kid, my mom would always, whenever I would have like teeth pulled, we would stop at Wendy's and get Frosties. I love Frosties. And so there isn't a Wendy's near our house. So ironically, both my wife and I had doctor appointments yesterday. Mine was the follow-up for all this, ending up at the thing. I can't think. And my wife had a regular appointment. So after our appointments, we stopped at McDonald's and got milkshakes. Well, milkshake and Frosty are not the same. I'm a huge Wendy's fan. So my wife went out. There's a regular beer club that she likes to attend with some friends. I was in still no condition to be having any adult beverages. And I just want to mention that I am now addicted to David Letterman's I don't know if I can't say new, but I just recently stumbled upon his Netflix talk show, which I started to binge watch last night. And while my wife was out, our family dog Otis and I were here chilling, and I said, well, I'm hungry. What can I eat? What can I make? What's the options? I'm like, oh, mashed potatoes. So I made a thing of mashed potatoes, and about 10, 15 minutes after I ate my mashed potatoes, it didn't want to stay in my stomach, nor did the milkshake want to stay in my stomach. I should have warned you, but anyway, It's what time is it? It's 12:30 p.m. Mountain Time right now as I'm recording this, and I'm hungry, but I'm not really hungry. I think yesterday really wiped me out. So anyway, enough banter. Let's get into this program with our guest, Eugene Schneeberg. So, again, Eugene's book is I Never Met My Father, a powerful true story of brokenness, forgiveness, healing, restoration, and hope. Um, we talk a lot about, what it's like um, not having a father around. His journey of trying to find his father, and the story on not that his story has ended, but the story of when he maybe, I'm not going to give it away, he might have found his father. But anyway, and it was a 30-year search to find his dad. So there you go. A new book is ready. I'm waiting on the physical copy, by the way, speaking of books. And once I approve that, which will be any day now, any day, it will be up on the website, blendingfamily.com, and I would say also on Amazon. But one thing you have to learn about when you buy books on Amazon from especially we self-published authors, Amazon takes about 40, is it 40%? I want to say it's even more, 40% of, so if you buy the book for at $20, majority of that's going back to Amazon. Jeff Bezos' pocket. So anyway, I hope you'll buy the book through the website, blendingfamily.com. All right, I can feel my tooth hurting. I need some aspirin. And as Terry Crews would say, your success is my success. Well, good morning, Eugene. Thank you so much for getting up super early to be on the Blending the Family podcast. I am so excited to talk about your brand new book. And, it's really interesting because when I think of the title of your book, I Never Met My Father, one of our friends, podcast guests that have been on this podcast, Jason Podgrant, who has a book called Father-Daughter Conversations. And there's so many similarities between hearing a lot of the stories in Jason's book and a lot of things that you talk about in your book. So let's start at the beginning, Eugene. Where did you grow up? Where are you from? And what did you want to aspire in life?
Yeah, Tommy. Well, thanks for having having me on the podcast this morning, and thank you for your long commitment to strengthening fathers and strengthening families, man. So it's a big deal. I'm really blessed to be on with you today. I was born in Boston, the city of champions, and my family and I are big Patriots, Celtics, Red Sox fans. But I grew up in Boston in the late '80s, early '90s. My mother, God bless her, raised my sister and I by herself. And speaking of sports, I remember Tommy watching this 1985 Patriots Bears Super Bowl by myself at probably 8 years old because I just had two women in my household, my mom and my sister. They weren't sports fans. I'm 8 years old watching the Super Bowl by myself. And it kind of, for me, that kind of symbolizes my childhood. I didn't have any real male role models for the by and large. I had no brothers, no uncles. My grandfather died when I was very young, and so I was just trying to figure out what it meant to be a man, and trial and error, and yeah. So I mean, I knew my mother loved me, and I had friends' mothers who would pitch in and kind of help take care of me. But certainly that father figure was missing, and I became aware of it pretty young.
Well, number one, I grew up in Chicago, so
Hello, I want to say congratulations to the 84 Bears. What impact, looking back on that now, Eugene, of primarily having a lot of female role models around you, what, again, looking back, how do you feel that impacted your life? Because you just said you didn't have any male role models.
Yeah, I had a few. Let me just say this. I probably had a dozen close friends growing up from school in the neighborhood. Out of that dozen, only one of my friends' parents were married and lived with their fathers. Only one. And so he certainly was a someone I looked to as an example. Um, Periodically, I would have a coach here and there who was okay. He's a pretty stand-up guy. But for by and large, I was looking for it. What effect did it have on me? I think I developed insecurity really young. Um, I
How
didn't
so? How so, Eugene?
I didn't feel safe as a child. I grew up in Boston in the 80s and the 90s, and crack epidemic was kind of blossoming. Gangs were pretty rampant. My house had been broken into several times. I've been robbed, jumped, shot at before I turned, before I was a teenager. I didn't physically feel safe. Emotionally, I didn't have high self esteem or confidence. Um, I was just trying to make it. I was just trying to make it through life. And my mom was a substitute teacher, um, which meant she didn't make very much money at all year over year. Worked a lot, worked summers. So I was kind of a latchkey kid. My sister went on to get pregnant as a teenager. Um, there were times where we were at risk of coming into the child welfare system. Um, So yeah, I mean, I don't want to. I'm painting a pretty bleak story, but I did feel loved. I did have times in my childhood where I enjoyed, being a kid and had fun. But I was keenly aware of my father's absence, and when I got old enough to start asking my mother questions about my father, I did, and I think that's probably true about most children who grew up without their fathers in the home or with no relationship with their dad. I probably I remember being 11 years old and one of my first conversations with my mother asking her about my dad. And I can't remember exactly how it went, but it probably went something like, "Hey, ma, you know, tell me about my dad or what happened to my dad or where's my dad?" And she let me know that she and him didn't know each other very well. They met shortly after he came back from Vietnam in the late 1970s. He had recently been released from the Veterans Hospital, and they kind of met, dated, hooked up, went their separate ways before he knew before he knew she was pregnant. And since she had already had my sister and another girl who ended up passing away as a infant, she knew she could raise children by herself, and so she just said, I'm gonna just raise my kids by myself like I've been doing. And then a year later, Tommy, my father came around to my mom's apartment, and again, he didn't know she was pregnant during this time, and had. But my mother opens the door. She's kind of surprised to see him. It's been a year with no contact, and she says, "Well, surprise, you have a." Walks him to the back of her apartment, and there I'm in the crib. This is your son, and he's obviously surprised, and he says to her, um, "Wow, well, okay, well, I want to find ways to support you. My sister just had a baby last year and she had some newborn clothes. Would that help?" And my mother kind of pays him lip service, but essentially, after thinking about it, she kind of goes with her intuition and says, "I really don't know this guy very well. I don't really trust him." And she makes a decision in that moment that she doesn't want to really involve him in her life or in my life. So she kind of tells him as much. She kind of says, well, I'm kind of good. I'm all right. You can kind of keep the baby close. And eventually, he calls a few more times. Eventually, she stops kind of picking up his calls and eventually moves to a different apartment. This is the 1970s, no internet, um, no Google. And so they lose touch. And that's the last time my mother and father spoke. And that was 1978. So I never met my dad, Tommy. And so I started after those initial conversations, I started looking through the phone book. Remember that thing, the white
Yeah, yeah,
pages
yeah. The white pages and yellow pages.
and the yellow pages. Yep. And I'll say this and then I'll pause. I thought to myself, like any 11-year-old would be, okay, I know his first and last name. It's actually a very common first name and a very common last name, which was what made it so difficult to look for him all these years.
Oh,
His
right.
last name was Graham. And so I said, okay, well, I know how to use the phone book. I'm going to open it up to G, find Graham, and lo and behold, in this great city of Boston, there's hundreds, hundreds of Grahams. So at 11 years old, I thought to myself, well, I'll just call through the list until I get my dad's family or reach him. And I went to pick up the phone to the first Graham on the list, and I just froze with uh, with fear. And what would I say?
Right.
What would that conversation look like? I'm 11 years old. I'm a quiet, shy kid. I'm going to call hundreds of strangers until I find my father. And so, you know what I did, Tommy? I didn't make one phone call. I closed the phone book and I kind of closed that chapter. And for another year or so, I wouldn't ask my mother about my dad until it kind of came up in my heart. And then each time I'd ask her, she'd give me a little bit more information. He was 6'3" one time she'd tell me, or he had a brother in the area. Another time she told me, or um, another time she told me she thought he worked for a hotel in downtown Boston. So every few years she'd add a new detail, and I think, okay, that'll help me get closer and closer. But it really never did. I just didn't have a date of birth, a middle name, social security number, anything that could really help me identify him and distinguish him from the thousands of other people with his same name. So yeah, that's how kind of my journey 30 something years ago of looking for my dad started.
Did you ever sit down with your mom and say, not to, be mean about it, but say, did you really think you made the right choice? Or in your heart, Eugene, you still feel that that was the best decision of your mom's telling your dad, nope, we're good, we'll be fine. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a hard game to play, the what if game, but do you feel that maybe it was a good choice after all?
yeah. No, I've pondered this question quite a bit, and I'm glad you brought it up. Because I'd say most of my life, the emotion I felt towards my father was, even though I deeply longed to know who he was and about him, I also had this resentment. I think a lot of boys have towards their fathers when they're not involved. I think it's pretty common to have these feelings. It's you don't know what to do with the emotions, and so the best emotion that you know how to express is anger. So it was latent, it was low, but it was there. I didn't really put two and two together about my mom because I knew she was there day in day out. I knew she sacrificed. I knew she loved me. So those I wouldn't describe any feelings of resentment towards my mom. It just was empathy, I'd say, for all that she had been through in her life and the sacrifices she made for my sister and I. It wasn't until later in life when I became an adult that I was able to put two and two together. Like, okay, so she actually had a big role in contributing to my dad not being there. And even still, sons love we love our mothers, right?
Right.
You can't mess with a dad with a son's mother. Um, so in retrospect, and you know, I think that most humans make the best decision that they can given the information they have at that moment. I think they do what they think is best for themselves. And I think parents generally do what they think is best for their children. Whether or not that is best or not, I think they do what they think is best in the moment. And I think that's true about my mom. I think she thought about it and said, my mom has struggled with a lot of fear over her life. She's experienced a lot of trauma. And I remember her telling me a story, it's in my book, about a single mom that she knew, and this is in the 70s, and almost a very similar story. She had a baby by a guy she didn't know well, and the guy kind of said, "Oh, well, I want to bring the baby to see my parents, down south." And I remember hearing the story as a child, almost as a cautionary tale, and that dad never brought the baby back. And in my mother's mind, she never wanted that to happen to her. And so that's what she made. Kind of made up that story in her mind that that could easily happen to her and happen to me. And so I think my mom's maternal protective instincts kicked in, and that's why she made that decision. Looking back at it, Tommy, we can't change the past. I love my mother dearly. Um, I'm the man I am today, the father I am, and the husband I am, in large part because of my mom and because of my father's absence. Right? It actually is a saying that I like to quote: "Your greatest pain is your greatest gift." And so, as I look back at my childhood, I
Mm.
think about my greatest pain being not knowing my dad. It's actually translated to a gift in the sense of it's given me a sense of purpose and calling. And I've had the opportunity to work on a number of projects to promote fatherhood and meet a number of extraordinary people like yourself, Tommy, who are really committed to strengthening families and strengthening fathers. Had my mom not made that decision way back then in 1978, I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't have written the book. I don't think I would have had such a strong commitment to my wife and my children. And I overdo it with my kids because I didn't have it. And so I want my children to experience all the love, affirmation, support that I didn't have. So I think my children are beneficiaries in a lot of ways of my dad not being there. And then later in life, and hopefully we'll get to this, Tommy, I was able to connect with my dad's family and learn a little bit about him. Um, and learning about his life, even though he passed away in 2004, before I had an opportunity to meet him, he had his whole set of struggles that he wrestled with. And I've been able to forgive him and release him and forgive my mother and release her. And I think that's all part of the journey.
Man, Eugene, thank you so much for sharing. I do want to unpack a couple of things. So, within your new book, I Never Met My Father, one thing I want to ask you is what can moms get out of your book? Because you do talk a lot about being raised by your mother, having a sister. What your journey is about, essentially about fatherhood, but what is it that you want moms and the ladies to get out of your book?
Yeah, great question, Tommy. And I hope that my book gives them insight into the mind of a child raised without their father. I try and be really open, vulnerable, transparent, and raw in my story. And so I hope they can see the world through the eyes of a fatherless child. Again, I think all mothers um, love their children, and just like all fathers love their children, and I think we do the best that we can given the circumstances we have and the options we have. I know a lot of mothers who um, had a child with someone, the relationship didn't work out, and as a result of that relationship not working out, oftentimes this distance is created between not only the mom and dad, but the dad and the children as a result of their relationship not working out. And I think oftentimes in that moment, kind of like my mother did, those moms say, this guy's not trustworthy, right? He did some stuff to me. Oftentimes it's the guy cheating or something, but um, I can't trust him. He hurt me, and I don't want him to hurt my children. And so out of that hurt, a lot of mothers make a decision to really distance themselves from the father of their children. And I would hope that every mother who's listening um, would understand that even though you may not um, continue in a relationship with that man, even though you might not even like him, even though he might not be a great guy, or you might not perceive him to be a great guy, he might have done some dishonorable things. The reality still remains that that is still the father of your child, and that your children will still long for a relationship with their fathers, even as I longed for a relationship with my father all these years. And so I would hope that they would be able to differentiate between what their relationship with the father of their children is and what their children's relationship is, and that you can do both. You can have a healthy boundaries with the father of your child. You can give yourself enough time to enough space to distance yourself until you get to a place where you there's some healing and some wholeness there. But the reality still remains that children, by and large, the research is clear that when fathers are positively engaged in the lives of their children, that every outcome improves: academic performance, behavior, um, less involvement in the juvenile justice system, lower levels of depression, um, lower levels of homelessness, suicide. Every indicator you can think of, children's outcomes improve when their dads are positively engaged in their lives. So I would ask that moms consider that and be willing to make a way um, for their children to be engaged with their father, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's painful, even if it takes the mom being the bigger one or forgiving or releasing for the betterment of their child. I would hope that in reading my book they see that that comes through loud and clear, and it doesn't take anything away from moms that children want to be connected to their dads. My mom, she's 80 years old now. She lives with us most of the year. She'll say things like, "I thought I was doing enough. I thought I was both your mother and father. I had no idea that you felt this way." Um, and I think a lot of mothers don't know. They just think, "Hey, I'm I'm providing. I'm working hard. I'm taking care of my kids. My kids are well taken care of. They're fed. They're clean. They're clothed. They're safe. And so I've done my job." And they have, and they should be celebrated for that, for all the sacrifices that mothers do raising children by themselves. But the reality still remains that that man's DNA is in that child, and that daughters are going to long for the love of their father, and sons are going to long for the love of their father as well, and to know them. And so, um, Tommy, I know it's not easy. I hope in reading my book that mothers will get some strategies and some insight to help them bridge that gap um, with the fathers of their children, whether they're divorced or separated or what have you, for the betterment of the children.
Yeah, I totally agree with you because, coming from the world of divorce and the world of co-parenting, Eugene, it is so vital that, both former spouses understand that they need each other in their children's lives. And it just frustrates the heck out of me when you have one parent or the other parent, you know, not giving the child the opportunity to spend time with the other parent.
Yeah.
And you know, your statistics are spot on, and it's so sad when you do have parents that, put the kids' lives, in the middle, when it's like, don't make them the pawn. you know, let them share quality time with both spouses.
Yeah.
Um, and it is so important that it's something you're talking about. It's something I mention from time to time is that, I might have been and could still be the crappiest ex-husband out there, but at the end of the day, I feel that I'm a pretty good dad. And it's one of those situations where, like you're talking about, the trustworthiness. So if a mom sees, the dad not being trustworthy, that, in my opinion, Eugene, that's between the two adults.
Yeah.
At the same time, they have to allow, again, the child to spend quality time with both parents.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, it's not easy, and I'm glad that you've invested your life and your time and your experience. I'm looking at your tips for divorced dads and tips to how to survive your parents' divorce. I mean, and the books that you've put out are great resources. It's certainly not easy, and but it's necessary. And I think a lot of times, Tommy, when our kids are young and they're so cute, um, we just think, oh, it'll all work out. They'll be fine. They're cute. They're resilient. Oftentimes, our children don't really start asking those questions until, like I did as a preteen and as an adolescent, and even to my 20s or 30s, or now in my 40s, where there's still questions. There's still a longing. It doesn't go away. Since I put out my book about a month ago, I've met so many people that have come up to me and said, I've never met my father either. Or I'm going to buy your book and send it to my 60-year-old brother who's still hurting from our father, right? So these these father wounds don't go away. Um, and so it's so important to take them seriously. It's so important to have those conversations. If you're a father or a mother listening, it's so important that you take time to talk with your children and listen to them and create a space where you can ask them. Because a lot of children, I was going to say this earlier, Tommy, I didn't want to hurt my mother. I felt like bringing up things with my mother would hurt her feelings. It would bring up bad memories. And so I could tell every time I asked a question about my father, I could tell it, at least in my mind, it was hurting her. So I pick and chose the moments where I would ask her. And I would say to your listeners that your children may be experiencing these feelings, but never bring it up with you or not have the courage or not want to hurt you. And so the more as parents, as adults, we can proactively create safe spaces for our children and ask them questions. How are you feeling? I have a nephew and a niece who have a very distant relationship with their father. And periodically, I'll just ask them. And it's uncomfortable to do it, but I will. Hey, you ever, how are you feeling about your dad? Are you interested in reaching out to him? And it's been emotional when we've had those conversations. My my wonderful niece is 22 years old. She's about to graduate from college. She's doing great. But she called me the other day in tears about her father, who she hasn't really connected with her whole life. And I was able to tell her, hey, listen, based on my experience, you don't know his side of the story. And you have all kinds of unanswered questions. And until you get answers to those questions, you'll still have all these feelings and emotions that'll be hard to process. But I told her, if and when you're ready to connect with your dad and have those conversations, I will go with you. I will sit with you. I will be on the phone. I'll help walk you through it if you don't feel like you have the courage to do it on your own. And so sometimes as children, it's just paralyzing to think, just like I told the story about being on looking through the phone book. It's also paralyzing to just call your dad out the blue, right? For a child, it's very, very difficult to do that. And so as adults, we need to do all that we can to help reconcile fathers to their children, mothers to their children, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm happy you talked about that because um, one of the things I've wanted to do, but very nervous to do. Jason Kreidman, who's the founder of Dad University, he and I were having a conversation. He was a guest on the podcast, and he told me that he actually had a conversation. He recorded it for a podcast with his dad,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, "Tommy, you got to do it. You got to do it. You got to do it." And so I think, ironically, I was thinking about this last night because I started thinking about, you know, things I wanted to talk to you about, and putting some questions in my head, and I'm like, I keep going back to that, Eugene, that it's going to be one of the most uncomfortable conversations, but it's something that I'm sure needs to come out. And so I commend you for being such a great mentor to your niece and to your nephew, because one day they're going to understand, again, dad might be a jerk, but he's still dad at the end of the day. And the
Mm-hmm.
importance of having any kind of relationship, again, with both parents.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to your point, having what you're doing, kind of, I guess, egging them on, saying, "Hey, hey, hey, one day that day's going to come, and unfortunately, there's the possibility of having that regret of not having those deep down conversations with the man, like you said, has your DNA."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I was. It's so interesting that we're having this conversation, Tommy. Um, so I think you're alluding to maybe it sounded like you were either you yourself or someone you know is contemplating having a conversation with your dad or their dad. I think it's so important. I was doing a podcast a few weeks ago with a good brother in Boston who's doing great work, and he's interviewing me, and he starts breaking down because of the woundedness that he's still experiencing as a 50-year-old with his father. And I told him, I said, man, let's do this again, but this time I'll interview you about your father. He said, I'd love to do that. Let's do it. So I'm going to go to Boston. We're going to do a live session in June.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, but these issues don't go away. It's like it's like car trouble, right? They don't get better by ignoring them. And so I think we all if we're parents, we have a father and we have children. And so we find ourselves in between, right? We want to make sure our hearts are right towards our father, but we also want to make sure our relationship with our children are right, and it's a both and I think I think about my nephew, I think about my niece. Neither one of them are parents yet, but one day they probably will become parents. And I became a parent when I was 26 years old. Now I have a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And part of my journey was I had to be able to reconcile my own hurt, my own pain and frustration and anger. I had to be able to release that and deal with it and process it so that I didn't transfer it to the next generation, that I didn't unknowingly or unconsciously pass my own issues on to my kids. Now I still got my own set of issues, trust me. Um, but I'm aware of them by and large, and I talk about it with my kids. I remember, for those listening who this is resonating with, I remember when I was a kid doing family trees in school, right? You drew a tree, and on this side of the family is my mom's side, and this side's my father's side, brothers, sisters, grandparents. Well, my tree only was half complete, right? I had my mother's side. I knew my mother, my grandfather, and grandmother on my father's side. I mean, on my mother's side, but I knew nothing about my father's side other than his name. Um, and then when my kids got old enough to do family trees in school, their trees were only three quarters complete. They knew my mother, my wife's side. My wife has an amazing family, amazing father, and just a great, rich legacy in her family. But three-quarters complete. And so my hope is that, Tommy, that through our collective work to strengthen families, that children, when they grow up, they'll be able to have complete family trees. They'll be able to ask questions. They'll be able to ask questions about their grandmothers and grandfathers on both sides of the family, and learn about the history and the traditions and the struggles and the challenges, so that they can have a more complete picture of who they really are. I'll just say this: when I was coming up, Tommy, I had no pictures of my father, not even one. So I had no idea what he looked like, and that was one of the biggest questions I have. And I venture to say, um, folks who grew up with like me with no connection to their father, they went, "Do I look like him? Do I sound like him? What things do I have in common with him?" And so that's one of the things that I long for most of my life. I just want to see a picture. I just want to see, is there a resemblance? And in my book, I actually uh, I actually have pictures of my father that I received from my aunts and uncles later in life. Um, and and your viewers will have to be the judge whether or not that resemblance is there or not. But that was a major breakthrough for me. The very first time I actually saw a picture of my father was life changing.
In your book, Eugene, again, I never met my father, my journey from fatherless to fatherhood. Um, you have throughout the book um, action steps. Can you give us a couple of action steps?
Yeah. Well, one of the chapters in the book is called "Forgive Your Father, Forgive Yourself," and forgiveness is a major theme throughout the book, because I think, again, it's something that mothers need to be able to forgive the fathers of their children. Fathers need to be able to forgive the mothers of their children. Children need to be able to forgive their fathers and their mothers. Forgiveness is just so essential to having peace and so forth. So I wrote that chapter to help give the reader some real practical steps to get to a place of forgiveness. Tommy, my experience, having done this a little while with quite a few people, it's one of the hardest things to do is to forgive, especially if it's a resentment you've harbored for years and decades. You get comfortable with it, like it's your friend, like it's a blanket. And the thought of giving up that anger and that resentment is so scary and so closely tied with what you've experienced all these years that it's very hard. I've had people literally cuss me out for just raising the prospect of them forgiving their fathers, like vitriol. Um, so in my book, one of the practical steps that I give, one of the challenges at the end of every chapter, there's a fatherhood challenge, and the challenge for that chapter is for fathers to write a letter to their children, um, expressing the feelings that they've had for their children all these years, if there's been a distance. And another challenge that I issue in the book is for children to write a letter to their fathers, releasing them, forgiving them, for fathers to write letters to the mothers of their children, and for mothers to write letters to their fathers, releasing them. And I say in the book, you don't actually have to mail the letter, but just in the process of writing the letter and getting your feelings out and your emotions out on paper, and going through that process of saying and I forgive you, I forgive you, you get a long way towards the process of healing. So that's just one of the examples in the book.
How did you end up working for the Obama administration?
Yeah, it's a wild story. So by the grace of God, I was able to go to Boston University for undergrad, and out of college, when I was getting ready to graduate, my mother was at that point working for a juvenile detention facility as a teacher, and it's one of the hardest jobs to work as a teacher in a correctional environment, because all the students are at different academic levels and there's so much disruption in their learning. But she was doing it faithfully. And so she said to me, "Hey, Gene, I can help you get a job here if you want at this detention facility." 21 years old, I was cocky. My friends were going to work for consulting firms and grad school. I'm not gonna let my mother get me my first job. I got this. But guess what? I didn't have it.
Right.
At 21, I didn't have. I hadn't interned. I didn't know what the real world was about. So I came back a few weeks later with my tail between my legs. I said, "Hey, mom, um, what's up with that job?" So she introduced me to the director, and they interviewed me, and they hired me. So I went to work for this juvenile detention facility. 21 years old, about to graduate college, and I thought to myself, "Man, I'm going to work with these bad kids." And remember I said I'd been robbed and jumped and all kinds of stuff shot at. And I said, I really want to go work in a confined environment with kids like that. And so I took the job, and I realized on the very first day when I met this young man named Clifford Lawrence who changed my life. And I realized that these weren't bad kids as I thought they were. They were just kids that lacked opportunity, lacked support, encouragement. And it just changed my life. So I worked there for a few years, and I just fell in love with the work, and I fell in love with this idea of trying to help these young men, fulfill their potential. And they reminded me so much of myself. Many of them, most of them, grew up in households without dads. Um, Shortly thereafter, I started working for a nonprofit, a faith-based nonprofit that would help young people transition from facilities like the one I worked in to help them get back into school, find jobs, connect them with mentors. And in my early to mid 20s, just loved the work. I was learning so much about myself and so much about life as I tried to help these young men and build relationship with them. And we were able to reduce violence in Greater Boston and help these young people successfully reintegrate. And I kind of got the attention of folks in Washington. And eventually, I was offered the opportunity to uh, to interview with the Assistant Attorney General and the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. And I say it's a miracle. Um, but in 2010, I packed up my family and my newborn son and our two older ones, and we moved from Boston to DC to take a job as the director of the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships at the U.S. Justice Department, working with the White House Faith-Based Office. And had an opportunity to work on President Obama's fatherhood initiative. Tom, you probably know President Obama only met his father a few times, and he's written books about it and was real open about how important he thought fathers are and thinks fathers are in the lives of their children. So I had the great fortune of helping to advance the president's fatherhood initiative for the 6 years I worked for the Obama administration, and meet great people like yourself all across the country who are really committed to strengthening families and strengthening fathers. And I didn't know this growing up, but there's been a movement for 30 years plus of people, men and women, who recognize how critical and irreplaceable fathers are in the lives of their children, and have been working tirelessly to help strengthen families and bring healing. And so I'm so grateful to be part of that movement along with you.
So I'm gonna just make this a very quick story because there's so many things I still want to talk to you about. Because of the Obama administration creating that fatherhood initiative, Colorado was one of the, I believe, 5 states that got grants
Hmm.
for the fatherhood, and because of that, I'll have to save this for another day. But because of that, that's how I met my wife.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
um,
Wow.
that I'm not just saying. I have so much respect for former President Obama, partially because how we mentioned the '84 Bears.
Hmm.
Anyway, because he worked in Illinois, and
Yeah.
so anyway, again, because of the grants, that's how I ended up meeting my wife.
Wow.
Uh, um, uh, I don't know if you were like me, because you were talking earlier about being a latchkey kid. Um, I too was also a latchkey kid, and one of the things I learned to be self independent was cooking.
Hmm.
Did you have to make your own meals, and if so, what was your one go to meal,
Oh
Eugene?
man, Tommy, you're gonna embarrass me out here. Yeah, I did have to kind of fend for myself from time to time. Um, but my closest friends will remember this and make fun of me. And Tommy, you'll probably make fun of me too. But my
No,
buddies
not
would
me.
my buddies would call me on the phone and say, "Gene, what are you doing? Let's go play some ball." That's kind of what we did after school or on the weekends all the time. We didn't have anything else to do. No cell phones. um, I said, "All right, I'm coming right out," and I'd be hungry, so I'd go in the kitchen, and oftentimes the cupboard was bare because my mom, was low income. She did, like I said, did the best she could. I never starved. I can tell you that. She always did what she needed to do to make sure there was food on the table. But I would grab a loaf of wheat bread and I would grab a bottle of ketchup. And within seconds, I had made four or so ketchup sandwiches. And I'd grab them and I'd run out the house to go hang out with my boys. And they say, "What's that?" And I say, "Man, it's a ketchup sandwich." And they say, "Ew, that's nasty." But when times were rough, that's my go-to ketchup sandwiches.
Well, one of my favorite uh, bands was growing up was the Blues Brothers, and one of the songs they sang, they talk about a jam sandwich. When you take two pieces of bread and you jam them together.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's like that. And
My go-to was making meatloaf. I'm still trying to perfect my recipe.
there you go. There you go.
I want to, and I want to respect your time. Do you still have some time
Yeah,
left,
yeah. I'm good.
Eugene?
I'm good.
So I want to go back to because you have this on your website, and you mention um, how does your story end? So you mentioned that you found out your dad passed away in 2004. So knowing that your story still isn't going to end,
Hmm.
but what impact when you found out that your dad had passed away in 2004? Number one, how did it impact you personally? But how did it impact you as a father?
Yeah. So I started looking for my dad in earnest. I mean, I told you about looking through the phone book as a preteen, but as like really like intentionally, like I'm gonna look for my dad, where I mustered the courage to do it. Probably in the early 2000s. Probably, I probably well, let's see. My son was born in 2005. My first child. Probably, probably in 2004. Maybe when my wife got pregnant. Somewhere around that time frame. Um, and I was at a prayer meeting, and I just remember hearing in prayer like it's time for you to look for your father. And so I started this journey, and it was right around 2000. Looking back at it, my father died in 2004 um, of cancer. But I spent from 2004 to 2020 on this almost 20-year journey looking for him, even though he had already passed. But in retrospect, it was all worth it because I needed to go on that journey. I needed to muster the courage to do it, which took me a long time. I needed to deal with all the the insecurity, the doubt, the stress, the embarrassment. I needed to make the phone calls that I did and look on the internet and social media and hire the private investigator that I did and fail at all those attempts. And it wasn't until in late 2020 um, when I took a ancestry DNA test. I figured I had heard from a friend of mine that if you take either the 23andMe or the ancestry.com test, that it will actually tell you who you're matched with and what the relationship is. I didn't know that the DNA could do that, but it can. So if you take it, it will tell you this is your first cousin or your second cousin or your third cousin. So I thought, well, maybe it'll tell me if I have siblings on my dad's side or my uncles or aunts or cousins, or maybe my father's taking the test. So I gave it a shot as a Christmas present to myself. Um, 2019, I think, Christmas. and the kit came in the mail in 2020. And all I had to do was put a little saliva in the test tube, seal it, and mail it back, and wait for the results. And that's what I did in early 2020. Got the results back about a month, 6 weeks later. And I remember, you know, calling my wife, babe, the results are in. So she came, and it's like, you're waiting for that big news you've been waiting for a long time. And there's an app that you go on, and they give you a code, and I had the app, and there's a tab that says matches. So I go on there, and I was so excited and scared all at the same time. Am I gonna find, is this gonna be it? And so I go on there. My father's last name is Graham. So I'm expecting all these grams to pop up. Gram. So I look on the matches. Not 1 gram. There's thousands of matches, because it matches with, like, down to your 15th cousin or whatever. There's a lot of matches, hundreds. There's even some close ones, some second cousins and third cousins. It gives you that level of detail, but not one of them was named Graham. And I was so disappointed. Did my mother give me the wrong name all these years? What's happening? Why is this happening? Um, but I messaged the 4 or 5 second or third cousins that came up, and one of them got back to me that same day. In the midst of my disappointment, he said he had a different last name, and he says, "My mother's maiden name is Graham." And I said, "Oh my God, I'm so if he was my third cousin, his mother is my second cousin." I said, "There's a second cousin that I'm definitely related to named Graham." And so I ended up talking to her. And then she said, "Oh, well, I have first cousins who are from Boston, and these are their names." And for a couple weeks, little by little, this went back and forth via email and what have you. She gave me the names. I was able to look those names up, and I got a name, I got a number. I called. I reached this gentleman, young man, a few years younger than me, and I'm talking to him, and I'm nervous. My hands are shaking, and I say, "I'm looking for my dad." Now I'm 42 years old at this point. Looking for my dad. Um, this is his, he's 6'3". He was in the Veterans Hospital in late 1970s. Yada, 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 yada. Everything I knew about him, which wasn't much. And the gentleman on the phone says, "Everything you're saying about this man you're looking for, your dad, matches up exactly with my uncle." And so yeah, my jaw dropped, and he told me his name, and it wasn't the first name that I was looking for all these years. It was a different first name, same last name. And I realized over the time that my father basically was using kind of a nickname when he met my mom. And since they didn't know each other well, that's the name that she went with, and that was the name I was looking for all these years. So end up a different name, but I then did the DNA, again, and was matched this time with a first cousin, and I was able to isolate the fact that gentleman I was talking to indeed was my first cousin, and his uncle was my dad. And he let me know, "I'm sorry to let you know this, but your dad passed in 2004." And he said, "But if you want more information, I wasn't that close with your dad. You need to call my aunt and my uncle, who are still alive." So his aunt and uncle are my aunts and uncles. So I did. It took me a little while to get in contact with them, but we've been in touch for the past 2 years, and they tell me stories about their brother, my dad, send me pictures about my grandmother, grandfather on that side. And now tell me, after all these years, I actually got a full family tree. They actually asked me to be the family historian because I'm so passionate about this. And then COVID hit. I found out I have a half brother and a half sister on my dad's side. They too grew up without him, but I've been able to talk with the two of them. And unfortunately, due to COVID, we weren't able to meet in person yet. But I'm looking forward to the day to meet my brother and sister in person. And it's been a wild ride.
That's beautiful. That is, uh, I'm just standing here smiling that there is, even though in the sign of, not knowing your dad, but the story, like you say in your book, it's not over. And now the next part is meeting more family members. And how cool is that for your kids to be able to meet their cousins as well?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I'm grateful that not only is my family tree more complete than it was, but theirs is as well, and their kids will have will know about their grandfather, right, on my side. Um, and I'm grateful. And my aunt and uncle, who are still alive, have both read the book, and have shared with me how touching it was and how emotional it was to read this book about their brother, in large part in his absence. But I've actually talked to my father. Ended up getting remarried later in life, and I've talked to his widow. She's a remarkable woman, and she shared with me about the man he was, and later in life he was able to get some healing. He really experienced a lot of brokenness after coming back from Vietnam, and later in life, in his latter years, he was able to get to a place of peace, and I'm grateful for that. And again, my aunt and uncle are still around to tell me the story. I look forward to seeing them soon and meeting them, and um, but I'm grateful for my journey, and I'm grateful that I was able to share my journey in the book. And Tommy, I'm amazed. The book came out about 5 weeks ago, and we just got an alert that more than 500 people have my book now in their hands and are able to read it. And I'm just grateful that, and my prayer is that the book helps people get to a better place of healing, wholeness, forgiveness, and encourages and inspires, sparks conversation. Because I really believe that just as critical and irreplaceable as mothers are in the lives of their children, that fathers are as well. And I really hope and pray that my book helps um, strengthen families, and I hope that far fewer children experience what I experienced, that insecurity, that confusion, the discouragement, which led to bouts of depression. I'm really transparent in my book about challenges I experienced with my own mental health, being hospitalized. But through it all, God has been good, and He's using it all, um, you know, to help bring about, I think, healing and wholeness.
Once again, the book is I Never Met My Father, My Journey from Fatherless to Fatherhood. Eugene Schneeberg. Before I give you the last question, Eugene, number one, I want you to know, even though we both had to get up super early, you have really inspired me today. I am going to have more pep in my step today. I am so honored that you took the time to do this. How can our audience get a hold of you, Eugene, and your wonderful book?
Yeah, so the book is available on my website, inevermetmyfather.com. Inevermetmyfather.com. Um, you can pick it up on Shopify. Um, the book is only $12. And we're excited that organizations working with fathers are grabbing it, to share with, dads who are going through parenting classes. Um, Folks are buying books for their nephews, and nieces and brothers and sisters, and husbands. And so, yeah, check it out. inevermetmyfather.com. I'm on Facebook, Eugene Schneeberg. On Instagram is RepJC247, REPJC247. And but the best way to get the book and learn more about the book is just inevermetmyfather.com.
Wonderful. So, Eugene, last question is what are you looking forward to tomorrow? what are you looking forward to tomorrow?
I'm excited. Mother's Day's coming up on May 8th this year in less than a week. So I know this will air after Mother's Day, but I gotta do well with my wife this year. I got challenged. I'm not gonna skimp this year. So I do some shopping, make sure she feels appreciated and affirmed. Um, and then with Father's Day coming up this year on June 19th, I'm excited. We're doing some book events, speaking at some events leading up to Father's Day, and I'm just excited. Every day I get a new message from someone saying, "I just read the book. I couldn't get through the first chapter without crying. This has really helped me get to see things from a different perspective about my own father." And so I just get encouraged when I talk to folks like you who see the value of the book. And it's a wild journey. It's my first book, and so I'm grateful that it's encouraging folks. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Wonderful. Eugene, thank you so much for your time. I am honored that you came on to the podcast. And uh, who's the little boy on the cover of your book?
Oh, that's me. Yeah, that's me when I
Oh,
was.
really?
Yeah, that's me when I was 5 years old. Yeah,
Very cool.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. It's full circle.